Hey, what's going on everyone, and welcome back to the Bimmer Barn. Today we're going to be removing the rear subframe on my 335i as well as the rear subframe on my E91 wagon as we get ready to swap these things around and complete our full 335i wagon build. We're also going to be taking a look at the DMTL system, and I'm going to show you guys what the difference is between the wagon and the 335, and hopefully we're going to be doing the conversion so that the next owner of this car could possibly do a 335i exhaust if they wanted to. Anyways, I hope you enjoy the video, and if you do, be sure to leave a like down below. Without further ado, let's get straight to work. Now here what I'm doing is I'm pulling up on the e-brake handle so that it locks up the wheels, and that way I can break loose the bolts on the axle shafts. We're going to remove these prematurely, that way when the subframe is out of the car I can go ahead and easily remove the differential, because we're going to be replacing a lot of bushings back here, including the differential bushings. So one of the things that you need to remove to get the subframe is going to be the connectors for the ABS sensors and the brake pad sensors in the back of the car. And then we're going to have to remove a lot of the trunk pieces because we want to get access to the rear struts and remove the bolts that hold them to the chassis of the car, because we're going to be using these on the wagon. Now one thing is, when you're removing this top nut, because it's connected to the strut, it's going to kind of spin around. So what I like to do is grab a wrench to grab hold of the rod of the strut, and then an open-ended wrench to get the nut on the strut and break it loose. And then if you come back in with a drill like this electric ratchet here, it comes loose and it'll come off on its own. So that's just a quick tip if you don't have a pass-through socket set or you're having issues getting these nuts off. So now that that's done, we're gonna go ahead and remove the brake cables that go to your emergency brake handle right here. There's a little bit of a release tab that you can press using a pry bar, and that'll release the tension on the cables themselves. And then what you're gonna have to do is start removing the center console. There's two 10mm nuts at the back here, and unfortunately my center console is a little bit broken, so you'll see that the armrest actually separates from the rest of the center console. But once you've done that, you need to go back to the front of the center console. There's two more 10mm bolts that you have to remove underneath this wood trim right here, and with those 4 bolts removed, you'll be able to move the center console up and out of the way so that we can get access to the cables. Now there's just one more thing in the way of the cable release, and that's this little crash module, I think, right here. So just a couple more bolts and nuts and we'll get that out of the way, and then we'll have access to the Bowden cables. So these things are not too tricky. You just have to squeeze the black tab on the back side and then pull up, and it should release out of that little bracket there. And that way when you get underneath the car like this, you'll be able to pull out the cable from the chassis, and that way when it comes down with the subframe, it's not going to be pulled back into the car or anything like that. So with that done, the next thing is going to be the brake lines. They're kind of congregated here on this bracket, and if we just loosen the 11mm nut and pull the lines off, that'll disconnect the brake lines from the subframe entirely so that we can go ahead and drop it. Now I want to throw this in here for those of you guys with the wagons at home, because it's a little bit different getting access to the rear strut top hats. So you have to remove this carpeted piece on the side here, a couple of plastic trim panels, but then you'll have access to the same bolt as before. And we go ahead and break that loose and then grab our electric ratchet to completely remove it. Now next up, we're going to start removing all the under tray panels and heat shields so that we can go ahead and get access to the DMTL systems on both of these cars, since we're going to go ahead and try to swap out the rear luggage compartments, which will allow us to use the 335i rear exhaust section. So we're going to go ahead and remove everything here and then move over to the 335i, and we're going to compare and see what needs to be done exactly to make sure that we can add a 335i DMTL system to the wagon. Part of the reason now is the time to do this modification is because some of the DMTL lines are actually hidden above the rear subframe. So in order to remove them, you would technically need to remove the rear subframe. So that's why we're taking a look at this modification now. So as you can see, the lower trunk portion from the 335 fits in great, and that would allow us to have the twin exhaust. However, the DMTL system, which would go over in the side over here, on the 335, it's actually located over here. So what you would do is you would take all the lines, like that white line right there, all the DMTL pump lines that come out over here, they're different on the 335, and they'd be relocated to this area, which as you can see on the 335, it's tucked really nicely in there. But if you look at where the exhaust comes out and the frame rail, you'll see that it's just right on that line there. It's very close actually to the exhaust, but with the clever heat shielding, it doesn't toast that DMTL system right there. So my plan was to relocate all this stuff into the wagon, but now what I'm realizing is that I'm not going to be able to fit the 325 exhaust because it actually goes into this area right here, and it's a little bit wider. You know, the exhaust comes out further to the left than the 335 stuff does. So now I'm kind of torn because I would want to add the 335 setup to the bottom, but I also would like to run the sleeper exhaust system, and it looks like I'm not going to be able to do both. So I think we're going to stop here for today, and I don't think that we're going to go through with the full DMTL conversion just because I want to have this car as a sleeper, and if the next person wants to do it, then they'll just have to commit to using a 335 exhaust. Now, if my 335 exhaust didn't have a muffler delete like you see here, I would probably really consider doing the 335 conversion myself because I really like that quieter sound that you get from the factory exhaust. But since it already has the mufflers deleted, it's going to end up being really loud. And the other thing that we have to consider is that if we did the 335 exhaust conversion, we'd also have to do the bumper. There's no way that we're going to be able to reuse this because the cutouts for the factory exhaust are already there and it's not going to line up with the 335. So if we wanted to make it complete and OEM 335 wagon style, it would require a new bumper. And the one that I find people doing a lot is the E91 M Sport bumper, which allows you to use a diffuser, and then you pop off the single exit diffuser and you would install the 335i diffuser from the 335i M Sport. And that would get you a really clean look, but of course at that point it's going to look really aggressive. You're probably going to want to do an M Sport front bumper conversion, and then it kind of loses that sleeper appeal of looking like a stock wagon. So even though we just made this whole mess, did all that work, I think I'm going to end up reusing the touring component right here. And you know what? It's going to have a lot more storage space right here in case someone wants to add air suspension in the future, which would be a really cool mod on this car, kind of like what I have on my E39 M5. But for now, I hope you guys learned something about the DMTL differences between the 335 and the Wagon. And I think this is going to be the same setup as on the 325s and 328s because of the exhaust location. So that's going to conclude our video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed watching us pull the rear subframes out of the Wagon and the 335i. Obviously, we're not going through with the full 335i rear end conversion, but if you're doing this build at home, I hope that this information helped you out about doing the DMTL system and what it would take to, really convert the rear end. So anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed watching the video. Be sure to leave a like or a comment down below and subscribe to the channel if you're new and you haven't yet. As always, I hope everyone has an awesome day, and we'll see you next time.